Ever get that feeling like you're in one of those towns where like everyone knows everyone else's business?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you can't even sneeze without it being front page news?
Small town life.
Well, that's where we're headed today. We're diving into a case from a small town, but add in a chilling murder mystery that takes over 3 decades to solve.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're talking about the case of Janine Brown. And we found this story in a YouTube video called When Cops Solve the Most Twisted Case After 3 Decades.
Okay.
And it's on the channel M7 Crime Storytime.
I've seen that one. What's fascinating about this case is like how it shows what forensic science was like back then,
Yeah.
before they had all the DNA stuff.
Like what they had to work with?
Yeah. And then how DNA finally cracked the case wide open. It really makes you think about all those other cold cases from back then before DNA.
No, totally. Like how many more could be solved now?
Exactly.
It's crazy to think about. But for Janine, justice had to wait. So this story starts in White House, Ohio, back in 1983. And I know what you're thinking. The White House, like where the president lives.
Ah, right.
But nope, this White House is a tiny village in Ohio. And honestly, the most exciting thing there was probably the local bar called the Copper Lantern.
Ah, the heart of small town life.
Exactly. So there we meet 19-year-old Janine Brown.
Okay.
And she was a nurse's aide, just a kind, caring person.
Mm-hmm.
And Janine lived with her best friend, Pam.
Oh, Pam's story in all this is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about dedication. Pam's fight for justice for Janine is seriously mind-blowing.
It makes you think about the strength of real friendship.
Totally. But before we get to how she cracks the case open, let's rewind to that night at the Copper Lantern.
Right.
So it's a Thursday night. Janine and Pam are at their usual spot, just a normal night out.
Okay.
But this time, things went really, really wrong.
So how did it all start?
Well, it all started with them heading to their usual hangout.
The Copper Lantern.
Yeah. And they weren't alone. They were joined by Pam's brother, Larry.
Oh, interesting.
And get this. Larry had actually dated Janine before.
Wait a minute. So the brother dated the best friend?
Yep. Things are already getting kind of complicated.
Yeah, a little bit.
And of course, it gets even more tangled.
Let me guess. The boyfriend enters the picture.
You got it. Janine's boyfriend of 1 month?
Yeah.
Harold. Big dog a step.
Big dog, huh? Sounds like a character.
Oh, he was. The video describes him as a bit of a hothead, which you know will be important later.
I bet. So we've got exes, a current boyfriend. Anyone else adding to the drama?
Well, of course. It wouldn't be a small town without a rich kid stirring the pot, right?
Right.
So we also have Andy Gustafson. Apparently loved to flaunt his wealth and not exactly known for respecting women.
Sounds like we've got all the ingredients for trouble.
Yeah. We've got exes, a jealous boyfriend, and a rich kid with a bad reputation.
Like a recipe for disaster. So what happened?
Well, things take a turn when Andy makes a really crude remark about Janine.
Ugh, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was bad. And naturally, Harold gets super defensive.
Oh, I bet Big Dog didn't take that lightly.
Nope. A fight almost breaks out, but everyone eventually decides to call it a night.
Okay, but I'm sensing that's not the end of it.
You're right. As Janine and Pam are leaving, Janine glances back and sees Harold kissing the barmaid, Letta.
Oh, no. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah. Janine was furious, storms off, wants to confront Harold right then and there.
So what did Pam do?
She tried to talk her down, convince her to wait till morning, but Janine was having none of it.
Wow, she must have been really hurt.
Totally.
Mm.
So Janine leaves their house alone. She was wearing Pam's old high school cheerleading jacket. And that's the last anyone sees her alive.
That's chilling. Just gone.
Gone. Vanished.
So what happened the next morning?
The next morning, Janine's gone. Vanished without a trace.
Oh, my gosh.
Pam starts searching frantically, checks with Harold, but he claims he hasn't seen Janine since the bar.
I can't even imagine the panic.
Oh, it was a nightmare. Pam eventually reports Janine missing to the police.
And I'm guessing they immediately zeroed in on Harold.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was the last one to see her. They had that huge fight.
Okay.
It all pointed to him.
Right. So what did Harold say?
Harold insisted he was innocent. Said he went straight to his sister's house after leaving the Copper Lantern.
Okay. And did the sister back him up?
She did. She actually corroborated his alibi.
Wow. So if Harold was telling the truth, then where did Janine go?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And sadly, the answer comes a few days later.
Oh, no. What happened?
Woman's jogging in the woods when she stumbles upon something horrifying. A makeshift grave. And inside, Janine's body.
Oh, that's awful. So what did they find?
The crime scene was brutal. Her throat was cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated.
Oh my God.
And the video mentions that she was found partially clothed, leading investigators to believe this wasn't just some random act of violence.
It seems personal, like a crime of passion.
Exactly. So now the police have a murder on their hands,
Mm.
and this small town is terrified. But remember, this is 1983.
Right. No DNA testing yet.
Not really. DNA technology was in its infancy back then, mostly used for paternity disputes. So detectives had to rely on old-school methods.
So, witness statements piecing together timelines the hard way.
Exactly. And I bet that was extra tough in a small town like White House where everyone knows everyone.
Oh, for sure. Small towns can be tough. Loyalties run deep. People hesitate to talk.
Especially about something as serious as murder.
Of course. So, did they have any leads? Any prime suspects?
Well, remember Bill, Crazy Horse Heisinger, the survivalist who knew a lot about knives.
Oh, yeah. Given the nature of Janine's wounds, he'd be a prime suspect.
Right, so he immediately popped up on their radar. But like a lot of people in White House, Bill didn't have a rock-solid alibi for that night.
So he was a person of interest, but not enough to charge him.
Right.
Okay, so Bill was suspect number one. Who else was on their list? They definitely looked into Larry, too.
Pam's brother.
Yeah. The video actually says he was really torn up about Janine's death. You know, like he still had feelings for her. And the fact that he was struggling with alcohol didn't exactly help.
Right. I could see how that would raise some red flags.
Yeah, some folks in town thought maybe he'd snapped, you know? Jealousy and all that.
Especially since she was with Harold now.
Exactly.
So the ex-boyfriend becomes a suspect.
Right.
But Pam was convinced he was innocent, right?
Oh, she was adamant. She swore up and down that Larry was passed out drunk at home the whole night.
Wow. What a tough spot for her, trying to find her best friend's killer while also defending her brother.
It's a lot to handle.
So did anything ever come of those suspicions about Larry?
Not really. They couldn't find any solid evidence connecting him to the crime, so he stayed on that list of possible suspects, but nothing concrete came up.
Right.
And then just when the investigation seemed to hit a wall, a new witness came forward.
Okay, this is where things usually start to get interesting.
Yeah.
Who was this new witness?
His name was Chester,
Oh.
and he worked at the nursing home with Janine. The video describes him as a real night owl, like someone who just preferred the quiet of the night shift.
Oh, got it.
So Chester told the police that he'd seen Janine talking to someone in a tan van shortly before she disappeared.
Hold on. A tan van. Where did that come from?
Right. And what's even more strange is that according to Chester, Janine got into the van willingly.
So now the whole timeline gets messed up.
Completely. It shifts the focus away from the bar, you know, to someone who might have met Janine after she left.
Do they have any idea who this van driver could be?
Well, remember Andy Gustafson?
A rich kid.
Yep. Turns out he owned a tan van that matched Chester's description.
Oh, no. So now Andy's back in the hot seat.
Yeah.
What was his alibi for that night?
He claimed he hadn't seen Janine after the bar, said he went straight home. His wife backed up his story.
Convenient. But something must have felt off to the detectives because they decided to dig a little deeper, right?
Yeah, they weren't buying it. They searched Andy's van and found a few used Merit cigarettes. Remember, that was Janine's brand.
Oh, wow. That's pretty damning. But back in '83, I'm guessing they couldn't do much with that. No fancy DNA testing on cigarette butts.
Nope. Technology just wasn't there yet. They couldn't conclusively link those cigarettes to Janine,
Right.
but it was enough to make Andy a serious suspect.
So they had their suspicions, but no concrete evidence.
Exactly. And Andy refused to cooperate further.
Of course he did.
So the investigation stalled.
So the case went cold. A small town left wondering who killed Janine. Suspects in limbo. No real answers. But you mentioned that Pam never gave up. She's the reason this case gets reopened decades later.
Absolutely. Pam was relentless. She kept pushing, kept Janine's memory alive, you know, organized vigils, contacted the media, anything to keep the pressure on.
Wow, that's amazing.
And finally, after 30 long years, her persistence paid off. The case was reopened in 2013.
This is where DNA technology comes in, right? Like a game changer.
Exactly. By 2013, DNA was everywhere in criminal investigations.
Yeah.
So detectives Jay Gast and Tom Ross took on Janine's case armed with this powerful new tool.
So they went back to those original suspects, Bill Crazy Horse, Larry, and Harold.
Yep. They got DNA samples from all three men, though Larry's had to be taken posthumously. He'd passed away a few years earlier.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing. None of their DNA matched what was found at the crime scene.
Wow. After all those years, they were finally cleared. I bet that was a huge relief. also kind of bittersweet, you know, to carry that suspicion for 3 decades.
Definitely. It's like a double-edged sword, you know? DNA can bring justice, but it also highlights how long some people have to wait to be exonerated. The video shows Harold's reaction when he's finally cleared, and it's powerful. Relief and resentment all mixed together.
It makes you think about how this whole case must have affected everyone involved, not just Janine's family and friends, but also the people who lived under that cloud of suspicion for so long.
Absolutely. So if those three weren't involved, then who was it?
Right. That's the big question.
Well, everything started pointing back to Andy Gustafson.
The rich kid.
Yep. Remember, he was the one who refused to give a DNA sample back in '83. Right.
And that refusal just made him look even more guilty years later.
Like he was practically shouting guilty without saying a word. But how did they get his DNA without his consent?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. It's like fate intervened.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So there's this detective, Kathy Stooksbury.
Right.
She wasn't even part of the Janine Brown investigation, but she had this crucial piece of the puzzle.
What do you mean?
6 years earlier, she'd investigated Andy for a totally unrelated assault case.
Okay.
And she'd gotten the DNA sample from him back then.
No way. They had his DNA all along. From a different case. What are the odds?
It's crazy, right?
Eh.
And here's the kicker. Detective Stooksbury had kept that sample all these years, just tucked away in her desk drawer.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time. So they finally had Andy's DNA. Did it match?
The results were crystal clear. A perfect match to the DNA on that Merit cigarette from Andy's van.
30 years later, they finally had the evidence they needed. What happened next? Did they go arrest him?
Knowing they had him cornered, the detectives took a different approach. They didn't go in all aggressive, demanding a confession.
So what did they do?
They just focused on his denials,
Okay.
pointed out all the holes in his story, and how the DNA completely contradicted his claims.
So they basically played mind games with him. Let the evidence speak for itself.
Exactly. It really worked. But even with all the evidence against him, Andy still said he was innocent.
Wow. Some people just can't face reality, huh?
It's incredible, right? But his lawyers knew they were in trouble, you know, with the DNA and his weak alibi.
Yeah. So what happened? Did they go to trial?
To avoid a long trial, Andy's lawyers told him to take a plea deal.
Ah, the plea deal. Explain that for folks who might not know what that means.
Sure. A plea deal is basically when someone pleads guilty to a less serious charge in exchange for a shorter sentence.
So they finally had him, but it wouldn't be a slam dunk. What were the terms of the deal?
Well, to avoid a murder trial, Andy admitted to manslaughter and rape.
Oh, wow. So what was the sentence?
10 years for involuntary manslaughter and 5 years for rape.
Wait, that seems light for such a horrible crime.
The sentences were to be served concurrently.
Concurrently, what does that mean?
It means he'd serve both sentences at the same time. So basically, he'd only spend 10 years max behind bars.
That's just, I don't even know what to say. How did Janine's family and friends react to that?
The video shows how everyone felt. You know, there was relief that he was finally being held accountable, but also anger that he wasn't being charged with murder. And of course, nothing can truly bring Janine back.
It's such a complicated mix of emotions, right? Justice delayed, but maybe not denied. It makes you think about all those years, all that wondering who did it. And for the people wrongly accused, like Harold, the weight of that suspicion for so long.
It really makes you question, you know, how we react to things, how quick we are to judge.
Right.
Here's this guy who lived under a cloud of suspicion for 30 years.
It's heartbreaking.
And for what? Because he argued with his girlfriend.
It's a powerful reminder that we all deserve a fair chance. You know, innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly.
This case really shows us so much about the justice system.
Yeah.
How limited forensic science was back then, the power of DNA technology, the importance of being fair, and how complicated closure can be.
And it brings up a lot of questions about cold cases, how we help victims' families, and how we stop violence against women. It's a lot to think about, but that's what we try to do in these deep dives, right? Go beyond the surface and dig into the complexities of these tough issues.
Exactly. So if you're listening, we encourage you to learn more about this case, look into how forensic science is changing, and think about how we can prevent tragedies like this. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Janine Brown case. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those questions coming.